Come on. You'll freeze out here, she called, extending her arms to help steady them. The man, tall and weary, struggled to hold his two children upright, both barely 10, shivering violently in soaked, tattered coats. The boy's teeth chattered, and the girl clung to her father's arm, wide-eyed and pale. Without hesitation, Eliza ran to meet them, gripping their small hands and guiding them through the deep snow toward her cabin. The man sank under the weight of exhaustion. I can't keep them much longer, he admitted, voice hoarse. We were trying to reach the next settlement, but the storm, his words faltered as another gust of wind swept across the frozen landscape. Just come inside, Eliza said firmly, leading them through the cabin door. The warm air hit their faces, and the smell of burning wood filled their lungs. She helped them shed wet coats, mittens, and scarves, wrapping the children in blankets while placing a kettle over the fire. Drink this, she instructed, handing each of them a tin cup of hot broth. They drank quickly, tiny hands gripping the cups as relief softened their tense shoulders. The man lowered himself into a chair, letting out a long, shaky breath. I'm Samuel, he said quietly. These are my children, Daniel and Clara. He glanced down at them, worry and exhaustion etched across his face. We were traveling west, trying to reach family. The storm caught us off guard. I thought we'd never make it through the night. Eliza didn't press him for more. The frontier had taught her patience, survival came first. She filled another cup with broth for Samuel and placed more blankets over the children. Rest. You're safe here tonight, she said softly. Hours passed in quiet warmth. Daniel and Clara, initially hesitant, began to relax, settling near the fire with blankets pulled tightly around their small frames. Samuel watched them silently, his eyes shadowed with worry, but a flicker of gratitude crossed his face as he noticed how carefully Eliza had tended to them. Finally, he spoke. I should explain, he said, voice low, almost as if the words were dangerous. We weren't just traveling for family. My family, we had a fortune, hidden long ago. I believed I could recover it, but there are people, dangerous people, who want it for themselves. I barely escaped. Eliza nodded. Then you'll stay here until the storm passes. We'll figure out the rest later. She didn't need to see the fear in his eyes to know it was real. Out here, on the frontier, fear and danger were constant companions. The following days passed in a delicate routine. Snow fell endlessly, blanketing the world outside in silence, while inside, the cabin became a haven. Daniel and Clara began to trust Eliza, shy smiles replacing their initial fear. Daniel proudly helped gather firewood, occasionally glancing up with a serious expression that made him seem older than his 10 years. Clara insisted on helping set the table for meals, a small act that gave her a sense of purpose and control in a chaotic world. Samuel, meanwhile, spent long hours studying maps and letters, muttering to himself as he traced routes and landmarks. He shared fragments of his story with Eliza in quiet moments, speaking of cryptic letters, old family secrets, and a fortune that had been lost for generations. It was not merely gold, it was land, documents, and promises made and broken long ago. Despite the looming danger beyond the snow-covered hills, warmth and trust grew inside the cabin. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Samuel whispered over the maps. Daniel fell asleep with his head on his father's knee, and Clara clutched a blanket tightly, eyes heavy but calm. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Samuel approached Eliza with a folded piece of parchment. "This is the first clue," he said quietly, handing it over. "I trust you to help us find it." Eliza looked down at the sleeping children, then back at Samuel. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Because," he replied, meeting her gaze steadily, "you're the only one who hasn't tried to take advantage of us. You're different." She felt her cheeks warm but didn't respond. Instead, she nodded. Helping him and his children wasn't just an act of kindness, it was the start of something larger, something that would pull them all into a journey none of them could foresee. Together, they pored over the map, tracing routes and discussing landmarks. The storm outside seemed endless, but inside the small cabin, hope flickered like the firelight. For the first time in years, Eliza felt the pulse of adventure, the thrill of discovery, and a quiet determination growing within her. This wasn't just about surviving the storm anymore, it was about uncovering secrets, protecting a family, and stepping into a future that held far more than mere survival. That night, as the wind howled and snow piled high, Eliza sat by the fire watching Samuel and his children. She realized that the fortune they sought was only part of the story. The real treasure might be the trust, loyalty, and bond forming in this small cabin, a bond that could withstand storms, danger, and the hardships of the unforgiving frontier. Outside, the world was cold and merciless. Inside, a spark had been lit. It would grow into a fire, of courage, hope, and adventure, leading them all toward secrets, challenges, and fortunes they could never have imagined. And for Eliza, it was clear, her life, once ordinary, was about to become extraordinary. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world outside sparkling with frost. Snow clung to the trees like sugar, and the sun glinted off the frozen creek. Eliza opened the cabin door and breathed in the crisp air, the silence almost eerie after the relentless howling of the night before. Daniel and Clara pressed close to Samuel, their small hands tucked into his, still cautious, still learning to trust this strange new home. "We should move soon," Samuel said quietly, glancing at the map spread across the table. "If we wait too long, the thaw could erase the tracks we need to follow." Eliza nodded, her heart quickening with a mix of fear and excitement. She had always dreamed of adventure in the frontier, but never like this, never with children depending on her and a fortune hidden somewhere in the wilderness. "Then we start today," she said firmly. Breakfast was quick and quiet. Clara insisted on taking Daniel's hand as they walked outside, snow crunching beneath their boots. Samuel led the way, carrying a satchel filled with supplies, while Eliza brought up the rear, keeping a vigilant eye on the children. The map had shown a cluster of landmarks not far from the cabin, a ridge shaped like a crescent moon, a small abandoned cabin, and an old willow tree beside the creek. Samuel believed the first clue lay somewhere in that area. The trek was harder than Eliza anticipated. Snow reached above Daniel's knees in places, and Clara's small boots slipped repeatedly. Eliza lifted the girl carefully over a particularly icy patch while encouraging Daniel to keep up. "Almost there," she said breathlessly. "Stay close to your father." Hours passed before they reached the first landmark, the ridge. Samuel pulled the map from his coat and crouched, tracing the lines carefully. "Here," he whispered, pointing to a mark near a cluster of rocks. "It should be nearby." The children wandered a short distance under Eliza's watchful eyes, gathering pine cones and examining animal tracks. Clara pointed to a faint indentation in the snow near the base of the rocks. "Look, Papa," she exclaimed softly. Samuel rushed over, brushing snow away to reveal a weathered wooden box, half buried and locked with a rusty clasp. "It's the first clue," he breathed, almost reverently. He handed Eliza a small set of tools from his satchel. "Can you open it?" Eliza worked carefully, the children watching with wide eyes. With a soft click, the lock gave way, and she lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle of letters and a small, intricately carved wooden key. Samuel's eyes widened. These letters, they were meant to guide us. And this key, he held it carefully, as if it were fragile enough to break. Daniel leaned close, peering over his father's shoulder. "Are we going to find the treasure, Papa?" Samuel smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "We will, Daniel. But first, we have to understand these letters. Each one leads to the next clue." Eliza spread the letters on a flat rock, scanning the elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. One letter described a path along the creek, past the willow tree, and into a narrow canyon. Another hinted at a symbol, a carved mark of a bird on a tree trunk. The children listened intently, captivated by the mystery that had suddenly entered their lives. As they set off toward the creek, Eliza noticed movement in the trees. Shadows shifted unnaturally among the trunks. "Wait," she whispered, raising a hand. Samuel tensed, his eyes scanning the forest. "Someone's watching." The children clung closer to him. Eliza's heart pounded. The frontier was never forgiving, and if Samuel's warning about dangerous people was true, they weren't alone. They moved cautiously, keeping to the edges of the trees. The wind carried a faint sound of crunching snow behind them, but when they paused to look, no one was visible. Finally, they reached the willow tree described in the letters. Its long, drooping branches touched the frozen creek, and carved into its trunk was the symbol of a bird, just as the letter had indicated. Samuel knelt, examining it closely. "This is it," he murmured. "The next clue must be nearby." Eliza and the children searched the area, moving snow aside and inspecting the rocks and roots. Clara's small hand brushed something smooth beneath a tangle of roots. "Papa," she called softly. Samuel hurried over and unearthed another small box, similar to the first, with a tiny keyhole matching the carved key they had found. Hands shaking slightly, Samuel inserted the key. The lock clicked open, revealing another set of letters and a folded map leading further into the wilderness. The children peered over the edges, eyes wide with excitement. "It's like a treasure hunt," Daniel whispered. "Yes," Eliza said, smiling at their joy. "But every treasure has its dangers. Stay close to me, and to your father." As they retraced their steps, following the new map into a narrow canyon, the wind began to rise again. Snow swirled around them, and the shadows between the rocks grew longer, deeper. Samuel's expression darkened. "We're being followed," he muttered. Eliza stiffened. "Then we need to move faster. Keep the children between us." For hours, they navigated the canyon, the children's small voices rising and falling in nervous laughter, questions, and occasional shivers. The letters guided them precisely, but with each step, the sense of being watched intensified. Finally, as dusk approached, they reached a secluded hollow, where an ancient stone marked with more cryptic symbols promised the next step in the journey. Samuel knelt again, brushing snow from the carvings. "This is it." "We're close," he said, a mixture of awe and apprehension in his voice. "The final clue, and the fortune lies beyond this point." Eliza glanced at Daniel and Clara, both sleepy but wide-eyed with anticipation. She felt a surge of protectiveness, and excitement. They had come so far together, and now the real adventure was about to begin. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the faint sense of unseen eyes. Danger was near, but so was hope. Inside the hollow, the small group huddled close, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that their bond, their trust, and their courage would guide them through the frontier's darkest secrets. And for Eliza, she realized, this journey was not just about finding a fortune. It was about discovering the strength of family, the power of kindness, and the unexpected courage hidden within a humble cabin and two determined children. The hollow was silent except for the distant whistle of the wind and the faint crunch of snow beneath their boots. Samuel knelt by the ancient stone, brushing the carved symbols free of frost. "This is the last clue before the final location," he said quietly, his voice a mixture of reverence and anxiety. "If we misstep, we could lose everything." Daniel and Clara huddled close, trusting their father and Eliza completely. Clara, ever curious, reached out to trace one of the symbols with her small finger. "Papa, what does this mean?" she asked. Samuel glanced at her, his eyes softened with warmth. "It's a guide," he explained. "The people who hid this wanted only someone careful and worthy to find it. Each symbol leads us closer to the fortune." Eliza studied the carvings as well, her mind racing. They had followed letters, maps, and now symbols, each step more dangerous than the last. "We can do this," she said confidently. "But we must stay alert. I don't like the feeling that someone's watching us." Samuel nodded grimly. You're right. We've been followed since we left the ridge. He scanned the tree line, eyes narrowing. They know we're getting close. Whoever they are, they'll stop at nothing to get the fortune before us. The children exchanged worried glances, but Samuel crouched to their level. Listen to me, he said gently. We stick together. We move fast. And we trust Eliza. She'll keep us safe. Their trek continued along the canyon, narrow and winding, the walls rising like gray cliffs on either side. Snow had softened the ground, leaving few tracks, but the footprints they left were soon covered by drifting flurries. Samuel led, Eliza following with the children between them. Every rustle in the bushes, every snap of a branch made them tense. Hours passed, and the canyon opened into a dense forest. The trees were heavy with snow, branches bowed low, forming a natural tunnel. Samuel held up the map again, pointing to a barely visible mark near an old cabin hidden among the pines. This is it, he whispered. The last landmark before the treasure. Eliza led the way carefully, Daniel's small hand in hers. Clara clutched Samuel's coat, both children silent now, sensing the tension in the adults. As they approached the cabin, a shadow flitted across the edge of their vision. Eliza froze. Wait, she hissed, scanning the snow-covered clearing. Suddenly, a figure emerged from behind a tree, a man, dark coat and hat pulled low, face obscured. Another followed. Samuel stepped in front of the children, his jaw tight. Stay behind me, he warned. The strangers advanced slowly, eyes fixed on the group. I don't think you should be here, one called, voice rough and threatening. Eliza's mind raced. They were outnumbered, but she had to protect Daniel and Clara. We're just passing through, she said firmly. We mean no harm. The man sneered. We've been tracking you. That fortune belongs to us. He reached into his coat, and Samuel tensed, his hand resting near the satchel containing the letters and key. Eliza acted instinctively. She grabbed a large branch, holding it like a staff, positioning herself between the strangers and the children. Back off, she warned. You won't hurt them. For a tense moment, silence fell. Snow swirled around them, sparkling in the weak afternoon light. Then Samuel stepped forward, calm but firm. You want the fortune? Take a step closer, and you'll have to go through all of us. The strangers hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance. Meanwhile, Daniel whispered to Clara, Papa, what do we do? Samuel crouched beside them. We wait, he said softly. And when I say, we run. Eliza's mind worked quickly. They couldn't fight indefinitely, and the children were small and vulnerable. She spotted a narrow path leading through thick underbrush to the side of the cabin. There, she whispered. If we move quietly, we can flank them and reach the next clue. Samuel nodded, and they inched along the path, children huddled close. The strangers seemed distracted, their attention caught by the cabin itself. Carefully, they slipped around the perimeter and into a clearing where the final symbol from the letters had been marked on a large boulder. Samuel knelt, brushing away snow to reveal the familiar symbol. He reached into the satchel, pulling out the wooden key. This is it, he murmured. The treasure is right here. Eliza, keeping watch, noticed movement behind a tree. They've noticed us, she warned. Samuel's eyes darkened. He inserted the key into a small, hidden lock beneath the boulder and twisted. A faint click echoed, and a hidden compartment opened. Inside lay a small chest, its surface dulled by age but intact. Clara gasped. Daniel's eyes widened. Is that the treasure? He whispered. Samuel carefully lifted the chest. Yes, he said, his voice heavy with relief and awe. The fortune is real. But, more important than the gold or valuables are these letters and this place. They remind us what matters: family, trust, courage. Eliza smiled, glancing at the children. And kindness, she added softly. Sometimes that's the real treasure. Just as Samuel closed the chest, the strangers burst into the clearing, but seeing the determination in Samuel and Eliza's eyes, they paused. Samuel stepped forward, chest out, the children safe behind him. "This ends now," he said firmly. "Leave, or you'll regret it." For a tense moment, the intruders hesitated. Then, recognizing the resolve and the unity of the small group, they slowly backed away into the trees, muttering threats but leaving the treasure behind. Daniel and Clara ran to Samuel, hugging him tightly. "We did it, Papa!" Daniel cried. Clara buried her face in his coat, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. Eliza knelt beside them, brushing snow from their hair. "You were brave," she said softly. "All of you." Samuel looked at her, gratitude shining in his eyes. "We couldn't have done this without you," he admitted. "You saved us all." As night fell over the snow-covered forest, the small family and Eliza sat together beside the fire inside the cabin. The chest rested nearby, a symbol not just of wealth, but of survival, courage, and the bonds that had formed through kindness, trust, and shared trials. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, warmth and safety filled the room. They had faced danger, uncovered secrets, and discovered a fortune, but the real treasure, Samuel realized, was the family they had become, united in ways none of them had expected. Night had fallen over the frontier, the sky a deep indigo streaked with frost-tipped clouds. The wind whispered softly through the pine trees, carrying the faint smell of snow and wood smoke. Inside the cabin, Eliza, Samuel, Daniel, and Clara gathered around the fire, the chest that had caused so much fear and hope resting between them. The storm had passed, the danger that had followed them retreating with the fading light, but the weight of what they had uncovered lingered heavily in the room. Samuel opened the chest carefully, the hinges creaking softly. Inside lay gold coins, silver jewelry, and antique trinkets that gleamed faintly in the firelight. Yet among the treasure were also papers, letters, and documents, yellowed with age, their edges brittle but preserved. Samuel reached for the letters first, reading them aloud with reverence. These were my grandfather's," he said, voice thick with emotion. "He hid the fortune to protect it, to make sure it went to someone deserving. And he left instructions, not just for wealth, but for what truly matters. Family. Integrity. Kindness. Courage." Eliza leaned closer, her hand brushing over the worn papers. "It's not just money," she said softly. "It's the story. The choices your family made. The values that survived through generations." Daniel's eyes sparkled. "So the treasure, it's kind of like a test," he asked. "To see if we were brave and careful and good?" Samuel smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Exactly, Daniel. And we passed, thanks to each other. Your courage, Clara's curiosity, Eliza's kindness, they all mattered." Clara, still holding her father's coat, whispered, "Does this mean we can stay here now? We don't have to keep running?" Samuel's gaze softened. "Yes, sweet one. We can finally have a home. And a future. One we build together." Eliza looked around at the small family she had grown to care for so deeply. The journey had tested her courage, patience, and heart. Yet it had also given her something she had never expected, a sense of belonging. They had come together through kindness, through danger, and through shared hope. And that, she realized, was the true fortune. The next days passed in quiet recovery. Samuel and Eliza worked together to secure the cabin and the land surrounding it. They hid the chest safely, only using small portions of the treasure to repair the cabin and ensure food and warmth for the family. The rest would be preserved, an inheritance of lessons, history, and wealth that would be passed down to Daniel and Clara when the time was right. Eliza taught the children to read the letters, showing them the maps and symbols that had guided their adventure. Daniel was fascinated by the meticulous planning, while Clara adored the artistic flourishes in the old handwriting. Together, they pieced together stories of their ancestors, stories of courage, sacrifice, and love, that had been almost forgotten beneath layers of snow, dust, and time. One morning, as the sun rose over the frontier, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Samuel approached Eliza while Daniel and Clara played outside, building a small fort from snow. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "you've changed everything for us. Not just by helping us survive, but by reminding us that kindness and courage are as valuable as any treasure." Eliza smiled, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do it for reward," she said softly. "I just saw you and the children in need. And I couldn't turn away." Samuel took her hand, his gaze steady. "That's why you were meant to be part of this. You're part of our family now, if you want to be." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. For so long, she had lived with uncertainty, with the harshness of the frontier closing in around her. Yet now, here, she felt the possibility of home, of love, and of a life she hadn't dared to imagine. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "I do." The children ran back inside, snow-dusted and laughing, their cheeks flushed with excitement. Daniel hugged both Samuel and Eliza tightly, while Clara pressed herself close to her father, her small hand brushing Eliza's arm. "We're really safe now," Clara whispered. Samuel looked at the chest once more. "The fortune," he said, "was never just gold. It was the trust, the courage, and the hearts that could carry it. That's what makes it real." Eliza nodded. "And the danger we faced, it reminded us how much we can do when we work together." Over the following weeks, the cabin became more than a shelter, it became a home. Samuel, Eliza, and the children built routines, planted a small garden, and repaired the roof. They explored the surrounding land, tracing the paths hinted at in the old letters, uncovering more small artifacts and relics along the way. Each discovery reminded them of the past, of the family who had come before, and of the lessons that had guided them. One crisp evening, as the sky turned shades of lavender and silver, Samuel and Eliza sat outside with Daniel and Clara nestled between them. The fire burned low, and the stars shimmered above like scattered diamonds. "You know," Samuel said, gazing at the horizon, "I never imagined that a storm would lead us here. Or that a stranger's kindness could change everything." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes, the smallest acts matter the most," she replied. "Helping someone when they're in need, it can change a life. Maybe even more than treasure ever could." Daniel yawned and rested his head on Samuel's lap, while Clara held tightly to Eliza's hand. "I think the real treasure is us," Daniel murmured, eyes drooping with sleep. Samuel smiled, looking down at the children who had endured so much and now thrived. "Yes," he said softly. "It is us. And it always will be." Eliza watched the flickering firelight, the snow sparkling around them, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been dangerous, filled with uncertainty and fear. Yet it had also been filled with courage, compassion, and the forging of bonds stronger than any gold. They had found the fortune, yes, but they had also found family, home, and hope. As the night deepened and the stars glittered over the frontier, the cabin stood quietly among the snow-laden pines. Inside, a family huddled together, safe, warm, and bound by the adventures they had shared. The chest, now more than a container of gold, rested as a symbol of the journey, the lessons learned, and the kindness that had started it all. Eliza knew, as she watched Samuel and the children sleep peacefully, that the frontier could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also create miracles. And in that small cabin, surrounded by snow, warmth, and love, she understood that the greatest treasure had never been the fortune hidden beneath the frost. It had been the courage to help, the heart to trust, and the bond of family forged against all odds. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, the fire burned bright. And in that glow, Eliza, Samuel, Daniel, and Clara knew that no storm, no danger, and no challenge could ever take away what they had found together, home, love, and a secret fortune far greater than gold.